the woman caught in adultery, John chapter 8. So there's this woman, and she's caught obviously in adultery. And the Jews bring her to Jesus Christ, and they say, well, here's a woman. She's caught in adultery. The law says that she must be stoned. And so what says you, essentially? And Jesus Christ says, well, go ahead. If you really think about it, he says, go ahead, but he that's without sin, cast the first stone. And obviously they all get cold feet and decide to walk away and are like, no, we're not going to do this, because Jesus has put them on the spot now that if you're going to judge this lady, then go ahead, but, take into account your sin also. And so, Jesus starts, so they obviously get cold feet, they go away. Jesus says, where are your accusers? And the woman is essentially freed from that condemnation, but Jesus says, sin no more to her. And then she's dismissed out of Christ's presence. Yes. And Jesus refuses to cast a stone. He forgives her, only with the stipulation, sin no more. And of course, when you've received that amount of mercy, you would be very grateful that someone had stood up for you, and had given you a second chance, basically. And actually, all the people who were condemning her, they needed that mercy and they needed that second chance themselves. And yet they were so quick to judge and condemn this woman without taking into account their sin. Now, Jesus says, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. So Jesus is without sin. He had every right to cast a stone, But because they had put judgment in his hand as judge, he can say no. If someone gives me the keys to judgment, says, you have the right to judge, and I'm placed as judge, I can say yes or no. I can choose mercy, or I can choose justice. So Jesus, being the one without hypocrisy, being the one who they had given the stones to, decides, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to side with mercy this time.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is, like you said, when you're the judge, you have the right to make the decision. You can either be for them or against them, right? Totally up to you. So you see, obviously they bring the woman to Jesus, and like you said in the law, she was worthy of death, right? She was worthy of death, and she was brought to Christ, but he didn't condemn her. And, I think a lot of people in society have a specific view on Christ, and they look at him as a tyrant and someone who's hard and wants to smite you, whenever you do something wrong. And I've had that experience with many people I've spoken to in the past. But here you see a different side of Jesus that a lot of people don't talk about. You see the merciful side, the loving side, Even though she was worthy of death under the law, Jesus doesn't condemn her to death. And that's the same with all of humanity, I think about my own life. Man, I've done some pretty bad things, and still though Christ was willing not to condemn me, but to tell, give me that mercy, give me that grace. But all he was commanding me was to, go and sin no more. So you see that loving, nurturing, caring side of Jesus, not someone who wants to get us because we are doing wrong. But then I also see on the other side, the Jews that brought her to Jesus, they were in the mindset of, we were more righteous, we were higher than this woman. She was below us because she was caught in adultery. So she's worthy of death. And they had that piety about them. But really, all of us, we're all sinners. None of us have done right in our lives. We've all done something bad. And I think if you can't see that, in your own life, it's easy to judge other people, easy to condemn other people. And I've even done that myself as a Christian. And I haven't shown compassion or love to someone else. But Christ was also trying to point out their faults, while also showing mercy to the woman.
Yeah. And the trap was, would Jesus go against the system that Moses had set up?
They were trying to ensnare him, man.
That was the trap, and he doesn't actually kick against the system that Moses had. He says, cast the first stone, you who haven't sinned, So he's opened the invitation to them. Okay, yeah, sure. Go ahead and do as Moses did, but you who are without sin, do it. And if someone had had the audacity to pick the stone up, everyone would have looked at them and said, "Wait a second, you're claiming to be perfect now?" So he really kicked at them, because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So Jesus set his own trap there in a way,
Yeah.
okay, but he didn't kick against the system of Moses. He actually said, "Go ahead, but you who haven't sinned." And so really the injunction is Christ can go ahead. He hasn't sinned. He's disqualifying them as judges, but he's not disqualified as the judge. And you'd think of all people he would choose maybe justice, like you were saying, this perception of a God who is there to sort of judge us. And that's because perfection is a scary thing, like a perfect being, it's like, man, you must, you're obviously different, because perfection is something that is confronting, but obviously he chooses not to. And it's like, it reminds me of the time with my sister. Like, she was saying, when I was down in the dumps, a lot of people judged me, and of all the people who could have judged me, who I thought was going to be judgmental, it was you, because you're the Christian and you haven't gone down X, Y, and Z down the road that I've gone down.
Yeah.
And so she thought perhaps he would have more inclination to judge me, Certainly I had more right to judge her than those who had not gone down that, than those who had gone down that road, because there was no level of hypocrisy. But yet I chose mercy, instead, following in the footsteps of Christ, And my sister always thought that, Christ is just this perfect being, and and it's a scary thing, and he is perfect, by the way, he didn't sin, but she thought, he's so detached from humanity because he's so perfect.
He's not personal, really.
He's not personal, but he's very personal. He's acquainted with our suffering. He's acquainted with our grief. He was at all points tempted as we are, but yet without sin. He wrestled with sin, even unto death, even unto blood. So he was really, he's been down in the pit, which many people have gone down in, but he overcame, and he didn't give in to sin, but he's acquainted, he's touched with our humanity, and so that's something I can take from it, that perfection is a scary thing, when we behold it, but manifest in Christ we see that he chooses mercy instead of judgment. And I'm glad that the stones are in Christ's hand, that he's got the stones.
Glad they're not in my hands, man.
I mean, I'm glad it's in his hands, of all the people whose hands the stones could be in. He's the one who chooses mercy, And I think in the book of James it talks about how mercy triumphs justice, because you can't repulse someone who's already gone, like they're away from Christ, they're repulsed from Christ, they're in the world. The more you judge them, you're not luring them back to Christ, you're only repulsing them from the gospel, which they've already decided not to accept. They've gone into the world, they're the prodigal son, they're eating from the pig's pen, they've spent all the money, they're out in the world, but the Father has that compassion and allows them to come back to him, If it had been the case that people decided to be repulsive, oh no, you stay there, it's like you're not actually bettering them, And so, that's another way of looking at it too, that if you've sinned, the best shot you have is with mercy, and to appeal to a merciful God, rather than say justice, because you're in trouble. You're in trouble. It's like you're the thief. You've done something wrong. Would you run to the police station? if you're in that predicament, it's obviously hard to. But if you know what I mean.
When you judge someone, like you said, it's just going to turn them off. And I think it's definitely a different mindset. I think because at the time of the Jews, they thought that they were more righteous, obviously. And even in my own life, when I thought I've been keeping this or I know this, that I feel more righteous than someone else, and that's how I would have acted. But it's not until, just like this woman, you can imagine, she knew that she was worthy of death because what she had done, she had probably known the law, and that was her outcome. But she sees the mercy of Christ. And then when I see that in my own life, is like, man, I'm a sinner, I'm really, there's no good in me. I've seen the bad things I've done in my life and the things I've done against God. I'm worthy of death. But when you see how forgiven you are, how much grace you've been given by Christ and the love that he has for you, that judgmental side just will go out of your head, because why are you going to judge someone else when you really see that I'm worthy of the same judgment, but I've been given this amazing grace through Christ, even though I didn't deserve it. And I think it just keeps you humble, and it just sees Christ in such a different light, that he really is, a merciful, loving God.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Like, you can't cast someone out who's already cast out. It's like the best you can do now is to try and win them back to the land of safety and acceptance, and to come back, and to come to the foot of the cross, Yeah, but the funny thing is, of course, the Jews had to wrestle with their hypocrisy, and yet they were so judgmental, yet they knew that they were... they were convicted when Jesus said, "You who are without sin, cast the first stone." At least they understood that there was sin in them, and that they didn't have the right to cast the first stone. Otherwise, they would have. It's just Jesus Christ there, and here's the crowd of people. But Jesus had just said enough to reach them, even that they realized that, wait a second, if we do this, Jesus has challenged us that we have to be without sin to do that, But here's a question: why was Jesus so not judgmental? Why was he so merciful? Of all the people now, because he's the one who has the right to cast the stones. He's the one who's not sinned. He's the one who is perfect. He's the one who has not done X, Y, and Z. And so if he judges people, he's not judging in hypocrisy, and yet he chooses mercy. I think that's a testament to just the goodness of God, that God shows his mercy towards us, that he didn't just zap Adam and Eve when they sinned, but he decided to travel with humanity through this magnificent journey, going from Adam all the way up to Abraham, and he's going through Abraham to the children of Israel, and 40 years in the wilderness, and dealing with the children of Israel, and then finally going to the cross, and he's being crucified, and then dealing with the early church, and then dealing with all the issues there, that's God's goodness, It's like justice would say that you deserve to get zapped, but I'm going to throw it in with you, And why does God choose that? Because he's just a good God. That's who he is, He decided, what? I'm going to bear the struggles with humanity and of humanity, And that's what he does, because the children of Israel, they were giving Moses a hard time, but ultimately they were giving God a hard time, Yeah. And so he bore with their stubbornness and bore with their sinfulness, And that's just the goodness of God. That's all it is, Why does God choose mercy instead of justice? Because he's good, and he loves us, and he sees that we're worth a shot, And he bore through humanity's weaknesses, from the start even, And I think Adam, he obviously, it's a bit like this, like if an architect is building a building, right, and there's a small little mistake that they make in the blueprint, to them, to someone uneducated like myself, I'll be like, it's just a small mistake, it's only a couple of meters, But for an architect, it's like all these things build up, If you're a little bit off and then you build a building, suddenly the whole building can be slanted, And so Adam, it's just one fruit from the tree, no big deal, right? That's just like the uneducated person like myself, looking at the architect. It's only a small little minor detail, but when you open the Pandora's box, you see what that led to, that slight adjustment towards rebellion, as slight as it was from eating from the tree, or as slight as it seemed, it led to a whole host of crazy things that humanity has done, And God knew that. God knew what it was. We didn't understand, fully comprehend it at that time, but God knew, and he chose to bear with humanity anyway. That's his mercy. So you see God's justice in the Bible. There's times where he does exercise his justice, but his mercy is the theme, you know. Yeah. His mercy is the theme.
Yeah, man. That's a good point. That's a good point to finish on. I like that. Good summary.
Yeah.
I think that was good. Went